This is the SF and SF podcast for November 2016. Recorded live at the American Bookbinders Museum, SF and SF is Science Fiction in San Francisco, a monthly series of author readings from the science fiction, fantasy, horror, and genre literary fields, hosted by Terry Bisson. And now, the coordinator of SF and SF, Rena Weissman.
Hello, everyone. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. We have a small but select group of attendees tonight who I believe all know each other, so it's like a big, huge party. I am Rena Weissman, the coordinator for SF and SF, Science Fiction in San Francisco. And I'd like to preface this evening by saying this has been quite possibly the shittiest week we have ever endured. May I say, I think it's more important than ever that we continue to turn out for artistic endeavors, to make art, to write, to sing, to dance, to express joy in daily life, and to make goddamn sure that no one can take that away from us in the next 2 to 4 years. So, donate where you can, volunteer where you can, stay strong, and if I say anything more, I'm going to cry. So, anyways, I'm still with her, and I have a feeling I'm in a light crowd, which is really great. So, just look to what you can do to stay sane and help others and be an ally. So, and political speech now over, but I felt I had to say something. On a happier note, this is our, well, not a happier note, a different note. This is our last SF and SF for the year. We do take a hiatus in December. We will not be having any author events. But in lieu of that, one of the things we are offering is that we have a tour scheduled for next Saturday at 1 o'clock of our very lovely venue, the American Bookbinders Museum. If you would like to attend, just sign up at the front of the museum on the sign-up sheet and put ABM after your email address. We have spots for 10 and it'll fill up quick. I've already got 3 or 4 already spoken for. We're going to do lunch beforehand next door at Jamber. It'll be a nice artistic event where we can, again, kind of forget our sorrows for a couple hours and enjoy each other's company and have fun seeing exactly what this museum is set up for. And I have Madeline Robbins here, who is the, shall I say, the power behind the throne, because I love that phrase, the otherwise known as operations manager of the Bookbinder Museum.
Good evening. Welcome to the American Bookbinders Museum. We are the only bookbinding museum in the world. There is the Gutenberg Museum in Mainz, Germany, has a bookbinding component, but they also go into things like printing. And there is a private museum in Turkey, but this is the only museum in the world, as near as I can tell, that is open to the public and celebrates the change from hand bookbinding to early mechanized bookbinding. It is, if I do say so myself, and I can because I'm not a bookbinder, really cool. And we are open Tuesday through Saturday. We have tours every hour between 10 and 4, except for lunch at noon, because we have to eat. But I encourage people to come in and see the place. We also right now have an exhibition about the 1966 flood in Florence, where among all the other art treasures that were endangered, 3 million books were underwater. As the phrase over the doorway back there says, if you live on a river, don't keep your books in a basement. So the exhibition is free to the public. Come and see it. It's really quite interesting. And here's Rena.
Thank you, Madeline. So since this is our last event, I want to especially take a minute to thank all the people that have made this possible throughout this year. As you know, we kind of bounced around from venue to venue for a little while once we had left the Variety Children's Charity Preview Theater. And the Bookbinder Museum took us in. We've called it home for a year. We've been very happy to, and we hope it continues. So your support is essential to that. So I thank you for your donations at the door and buying liquor and coming back on your off time, bringing friends and family in. All of that helps the museum keep its doors open, which we really want to happen, because when their doors are open, we can be here. So that's all great. Tachyon Publications for being our series sponsor. Cheryl Morgan for being our amazing web mistress all the way from England. Marin and Rusty with SomaFM for being our amazing podcasters, which adds a whole other element that we're very thankful for. Borderlands Books, Jude Feldman and Alan Beats for continuing to be our booksellers extraordinaire here. And also our other partner, the Balboa Theater, out in the avenues here in San Francisco, one of 12 kind of legacy historic theaters left in San Francisco. And our last event with them is also coming up, and that will be December 15th. We are doing a sneak preview of Rogue One, the latest, the coolest Star Wars film. And I will be sending out an email about that later. We'll have discount tickets. It'll be a big raffle. It'll be a big fun party for Star Wars fans, science fiction fans. Even if you're in an alternate fandom, I think you'll find a lot to enjoy in this movie. So that's coming up, and we'll be back again in January with Kim Stanley Robinson and Cecilia Holland. Don't have a date yet, but it'll be mid to late January. And if you're on our newsletter list, you'll find out all about that. If you're not, you can go to sfnsf.org and sign up in the left-hand sidebar. And without any more talk apart from, I'm so glad you guys all came out here tonight. I'm going to turn the rest of this evening over and abdicate all responsibility to Terry Bisson.
All right. Well, let's turn to literature. Our first reader tonight is a well-known and well-liked and active Bay Area science fiction author.
I don't know Rick lived in the Bay Area.
No. And he also he teaches fiction. I don't know if it's science fiction, but we'll talk about all that later. What we do is we have two authors here who will read, then we'll take a break. Then we will have Q&A with the authors. So we'll bring up some of that with Nick. Now, Nick also works on editing and publishing and publicizing Japanese authors here in the U.S., and he's been quite active in that. His new book, which he's I think gonna read from, is a murder mystery set at a Lovecraft convention. His earlier book, I know Nick because we both have published books with PM, and Nick's earlier book, well, he's got 11 or 12 novels out, but Sensation is quite an interesting book, in which humans are basically they're basically pawns in a war between spiders and wasps. I'll let him describe that later if he wants to.
If it comes up, yeah.
If it comes up. My friend and colleague, Nick Mamatas.
All right. Hey, thanks. So I'm not going to read very much for two reasons. One, I am an absolutely terrible reader. And as my career grows, I increasingly resent having to read. Because it's totally unfair, because you're at home alone by yourself all day long, writing away. Then when someone says, great, now be an actor. And I think that's just a hard swift. The other one is that it's a mystery novel. And you don't want to, because they're for sale in the back. Did you mention that, Terry?
The what?
The books are for sale in the back.
Oh, yeah.
And as it turns out, sometimes if you read something from a mystery novel, you give away a clue that could upset a mystery reader. And if there's anyone even more easily upsettable than a science fiction reader, as I found these past few months, is the mystery reader. Yeah. But just to talk briefly about this book is a murder mystery that takes place at a Lovecraftian convention, of which there are several around the country. And H.P. Lovecraft, if you don't know, was this pulp writer from the 20s and 30s, sort of a seminal figure in science fiction and horror and fantasy. And of course, he was also a horrifying racist and anti-Semite. And whenever this comes up in conversation, people always say, but he was just a man of his times. Which there are now two rejoinders to this. One is that, of course, the 20s and 30s had plenty of people who were on the radical left, who were anti-racist, who were not anti-Semitic, and of course now we live in 2016, where Lovecraft would feel just at home. He could get a job in the White House. January 22nd, if he was mentally stable enough to even hold a job, which he is not.
He can have the National Endowment for the Arts.
That's right, he can be in charge. Yeah. So I'm just going to read like 3 pages, and just to set up the story a little bit. One thing that always dissatisfied me about most mysteries is that we don't really care about the victim, right? Even, what's his name? Edmund Wilson had mentioned this in his essay, Who Cares Who Killed Roger Ackroyd? So my solution to that, which is a very ham-fisted, goofy solution, was to have the victim be dying or have, sort of remnant brain activity left, and he narrates half the novel from this lab. So that solved a problem by introducing other problems. So I'm going to read you a little bit of what he thinks of Lovecraft fandom, and just on top of everything else, and on top of all the other problems I've had. I'm a plagiarist, to let you know. And I plagiarized the first line I'm going to read to you from somebody in this room. And you can guess, and maybe you'll win a prize later. So this is the main character. His name is Panosian. He's an unsuccessful writer of Lovecraftian fiction that nobody likes inside Lovecraft fandom, and so everyone's a suspect. And just before I begin, actually, what's one more thing? This has been a generally well-reviewed book, but there have been 2 major complaints in the negative and mixed reviews, and the 2 complaints are, one, that all these Lovecraft fans in the book are these broad stereotypes. It's totally unfair. They're just caricatures. And the second major complaint is that these are obviously real people that you're just humiliating. And the amazing thing is they're most often in the same review. And, I just have to agree with it. So we'll just read a couple pages. Fandom is the social network of last resort. It's true. Lovecraftians in particular are a bunch of misfits and social defectives. It started with the old man himself, who was crippled by neuroses so huge he had no choice but to become a genius at what he did. Lovecraft's short stories, so widely distributed in grade school libraries because they contain 0 sex, and like the merest suggestions of violence, were like cheese in a mousetrap. Boys, almost always boys, too fat or awkward or arrogant for sports, not actually bright enough to achieve top marks, find their ways to the darkest corners of the dustiest shelves, and there Lovecraft is waiting. And if those traps don't get sprung, there are others. The internet in-jokes, the role-playing games, the video game levels that end with great green tentacles reaching out of a swirling vortex. They outperform an initiatory function. Lovecraft chooses his own. One of his most famous stories, The Outsider, even explains how it all works. This is a quote. Unhappy is he to whom the memories of childhood bring only fear and sadness, it begins. The climax of the story is a hoary old cliche, but the story's from 1926. There's a poor old ugly guy wandering around a suitably gothic castle as he narrates, all alone as he's been his entire life. He encounters a party, but when the revelers see him, they scream and run. He stumbles around the room, half Quasimodo, half Frankenstein's monster, trying to find out what happened when he sees a hideous creature lurching at him. He raises a hand, but too late, when he actually makes contact with the monster. Of course, the creature was himself, and he'd come across a mirror. What makes The Outsider special isn't the climax, it's the denouement. That's a misunderstood word. Ask one of the poor dears over at the Summer Tentacular, and he'll tell you that in the story's denouement, the writer's job is to tie up the loose ends. But the word means the exact opposite. It's French for to unknot, to deknot. What's being unknotted is the emotional tension created by the climax. The Outsider wouldn't be worth reading for anyone over the age of 9 if the story rested on the dumb twist that the narrator was the monster all along. Instead, after fleeing from his own horrible visage, the narrator makes his escape from a lonely life of fear and sadness. This is again from the story. Now I ride with the mocking and friendly ghouls of the night wind, and play by day amongst the catacombs of Netanka and the sealed and unknown valley of Hadoth by the Nile. He has friends. He somehow got his big ugly ass to fucking Egypt. And life in Egypt is great. It's a big party. He's found his home among the freaks, and the freaks don't run from fellow freaks. I know that the light is not for me, save for that of the moon over the rock tombs of Neb, nor any gaiety save for the unnamed feast of Nitocris beneath the Great Pyramid. Then I remember that I'm dead. No feasts, no pyramid, just a body in a shoebox talking to nobody, while I wait for my brain to decompose sufficiently that whatever is left of me finally turns off. Is time even passing, or all these cogitations just one last burst of activity, every synapse blazing at once and I no longer need to breathe, since my heart no longer beats? I'm an echo of an echo, the ultimate outsider. But in Lovecraft's fiction, the outsider becomes the insider. That's the appeal. The bookish little nerd, often with synthetic inclinations if not exactly talent, figures out what's really going on. Ancient languages are deciphered, inexplicable phenomena examined, myths so obscure they can only be discussed in terms older than mankind have discovered to be the literal history of the universe. And the texts themselves prove all sorts of insider jargon and references to the initiated. And like all initiatory regimes, there are levels of enlightenment, ever more complex signs and tokens, layers of occult truth. It's easy to see where L. Ron Hubbard got his inspiration for the Church of Scientology from. Okay, thanks. That's it.
All right.
All right.
All right, we'll deconstruct that later.
Yeah. Wow.
Our next author is a native of Florida, a long-timer in the science fiction community, a big part of ICFA, I think, or which is the International Coalition for
Conference for the
having
Fantastic
fun with
on
the arts.
Fun with the arts,
Okay.
that's it.
Yeah, and he has a new novel. I believe this is your third novel.
Third novel.
Yeah, and I believe your first really total science fiction novel, or is that
Yes.
correct?
You know, it is, you are correct.
It's called Alien Morning. He's touring
That's
with
morning like the morning,
Morning,
not sad for an alien who's died.
right?
As
Morning,
opposed
okay.
to the
Right,
evening.
okay, gotcha.
He's also written textbooks. He teaches communications and media writing, and he's also written a mystery, sort of like Nick. Only this is set in the world of baseball. One of the interesting things about Rick is that he was raised in the middle of professional baseball. His father was a pro ball player, so he saw the ins and outs of that whole thing. So, and what else can I say?
You pretty much.
He's also written textbooks on writing, and he's taught writing for quite a while, and he's written many, many short stories, but I think this is the first time he took it on himself to do every science fiction trope, and the main trope of all, which is first contact.
First
contact. Rick Wilber, welcome to the Bay Area.
Thank you. All right, a few things by way of setting it up. First of all, this is fabulous. I have a deep, deep history in letterpress printing that goes all the way back to my first newspaper jobs. And I just was beside myself to see the tools at work, and it was just wonderful. Secondly, I'm really glad to be here. I love San Francisco. I have a sister in Palo Alto. I try to come out as often as I can. And so I'm delighted to be here. Thirdly, yes, baseball. But I perhaps have written too much baseball fantasy and science fiction. And so, I know. So, and in fact, I probably am the king of that little tiny kingdom. So, the baseball, but I didn't want to have baseball in this novel. So he's a professional basketball player. So I just want to make it clear, I took a sharp left turn from baseball, all right? It says no baseball in here except he pitches a no-hitter in high school at one point, so I couldn't really get away from it totally. All right, so I also had a revelation tonight over dinner, and Jacob, sitting across from me, somehow we started talking about relationships and how I'm always writing about relationships. And I thought, holy crap, I am always writing about relationships. It had never really dawned on me before. But so I was going to tell you this book is all about aliens and first contact, but this is a book about relationships. And it's our hero is a second division European basketball player who has a serious enough injury that his career comes to an end. It's around the year 2030, and he has to find something new to do with his life, and he decides he's going to take up this new media called sweeping, where you wear the contacts and the people who wear the receiver set, not just, they see what you see, they hear what you hear, they taste what you taste, they feel what you touch. And so you're really sharing your life with them. So it's a future media book, which is the exact name of an anthology I did for Tachyon, Future Media.
Which is on sale in the back.
Which is on sale, that's right, right in the back, along with one of the baseball books. All right, so what I want to do is set this up a little bit. He has a brother that he does not get along with at all. And then he has a sister who something bad happened to her somewhere along the line in high school. We don't quite know yet, but she fell in. She had been really active, sort of soccer playing 15-year-old, and suddenly she fell into trouble and into drugs. And my guy Peter really has tried to do a really good job of taking care of this troubled sister. He's the only one in the family who seemed to be really reaching out to her, and the only one that she would trust to talk to. So at this point, I'm going to read a very short part and then come back into a little longer part. At this point, he's playing basketball. He's doing fine. The aliens have not yet arrived. We'll get to the aliens eventually and their relationship. So, but before I get there, I thought it would be good for you to hear sort of the relationship he has with his sister Kate, K-A-I-T, Kate. Pardon me. I need a beer. Good local beer, right? Drake's. Once, when I was in the good fourth year of professional basketball in Dublin, he plays for Dublin Rovers, a made-up team. Second Division Euro, though, then there is a Second Division European Basketball League. I was starting and playing well, making good money, enjoying life, and working hard. I received a video call from Sister Kate. It was just afternoon Dublin time, and I had a game that night. Some lunch, and then the shoot-around, and then the warm-ups, and then the game. Slash or pull-up or pick and roll, and hard on the D against Sheffield United, a good team, middle of the ladder, capable of beating the Rovers. Noon in Dublin Fair City meant 4 in the morning in L.A., or 5 in Santa Fe, or 3 in Atlanta, or wherever the hell she was now. She looked thin and pale, but she was smiling and excited as, "Peter," she said, "have you ever heard this song? Listen, okay?" And she held out some ancient headphones for me to wear. Katie, I said, "I'm in Dublin. I can't wear those, you know." "Oh, yeah," smiling at me. She looked tired and exhilarated at the same time. I'd seen it before, tragic, loaded up on smack. She unplugged the headphones, and it was old classic Hendrix I could hear now, the wind whispering Mary. "I hear it now, Kate. Jimi Hendrix, good stuff, but you're high again, aren't you? I thought you said you were in rehab. You were dumping the stuff." I did twice," she said, sitting back down in the bed. "And this is the last time, right now, this is it, okay?" "Kate," I said. "No, listen," she said. "It's coming up. You have to hear it." And I listened as Jimmy said the jacks were all in their boxes and the clowns had all gone to bed and somewhere a king didn't have a wife and it whispers, "No, this will be the last." "Did you hear that?" "I did, Kate. How long have you been this high? Should I call the EMTs for you?" "No," she said. "Didn't you hear that? This will be the last. It's a message, Peter. This will be the last. Okay? Okay?" "Okay, Kate. Sure, this will be the last. Where are you staying right now?" She smiled, the energy fading. "Santa Fe," she said dreamily. And then, "Staying," she added, and tossed her smartie onto the bed and lay back herself. And just like that, she faded out. I called the EMTs in Santa Fe and gave them her smartie number so they could GPS it and get to her. Then I left for lunch in that shoot-around in my game. When I checked after lunch, she was in the ER and she'd be fine again. Poor Kate. Good Kate. Happiness staggering on down the street. The wind whispers, "Katie." All right, so he has a sister who's in trouble, but she pulls herself out. She's really rather heroic by the time everything's all said and done. So the setup here is that my protagonist is trying to build a career, but there aren't really very many receiving units out there yet. He's trying to build a career in a brand new medium. And his agent sets up with a young woman who had starred in a TV show that failed, and she needs to revive her career. So the two agents and publicists work out a plan where they're going to have a fake romance, and they're going to make up and break up, and they're going to be real public about it. And the idea is, of course, to build an audience for both of them. Not that that's ever done in Hollywood. All of those relationships in Hollywood are all honest and true relationships. So he's having this relationship with her, and while he's with her on the beach in Florida, they see lights in the sky doing very strange things, and that's the arrival of the alien ships. And he happens to have his sweep system on, and he thinks it's all accidental, happens to see them first. And so now suddenly he's globally important to the media. And that makes her globally important to the media. So the publicists and the agents are overjoyed that all of this happened. So while he's dealing with everybody, he decides the supposed girlfriend goes back to LA, and he's going to go out and see her, and they're going to have a little get together, and they have a press conference. And at the press conference, what everybody wants to know is, well, is it true love or not? And he says, aliens. And they say, yeah, but how's your relationship? And he says, aliens. And so they sort of don't get it. So the Associated Press asks, is this a serious relationship? And so he's so fed up with that ends. But he has a chance through his sister Kate, whose life now seems stable, to talk to someone who wants to talk to him at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Apparently it's some inside info, and he's now globally successful. So the next morning, and her name, by the way, the girlfriend's name is Chloe, who also winds up being sort of a warrior by the end of things. The next morning, I rented my own Tesla and come back down to earth after a very heady day indeed with Chloe. I'd had my Bob. Everyone in my future world with any kind of money has a Bob, which if you think of Siri like 20.0, does everything for you, remembers everything for you, does facial ID for you, does your calendar for you. And as you'll see in the novel, if you have Bob all the time, if it ever goes down, you're totally lost. You can't even walk down the street. You're so lost. So Bob is helping him. So the next morning, I rented my Tesla and came back down to earth after a very heady day indeed with Chloe. I'd had Bob working overtime on editing the sweeps and getting them out in installments as Chloe and I had lunch at Spago, and then we went to the tar pits as we'd promised, and then dinner to nightclubs, and then to her place and a walk on her beach at Malibu before things got more intimate. Alas, no lights in the sky this time around. Eventually, about 3 a.m., we managed to get some sleep. At 9 a.m., I used Chloe's limo service to get me from her garage to a car rental office 5 miles away, and there, suddenly, I was anonymous again. No one recognized me, and I was both happy and disappointed about that. By 10:30, I was pulling into the driveway at Sister Kate's house in Pasadena. I was impressed that the house looked nice and the grass was cut. Maybe Kate had come to the West and found stability at last? I could hope so. Me, I'd always looked east when it came to travel and business, starting in college where the basketball and baseball teams played schools up and down the East Coast. After that, the Euro Cup League came calling, and I wound up playing those good years in Dublin, enjoying the road trips to Spain, Germany, and England. I loved it there. So when the knees finally blew out for good and the surgeon botched the surgery not once but twice, I'd hung them up by coming home to St. Petersburg on Florida's west coast and never even gave California a thought. Kate, though, had always seen things differently. For her, getting away, far away from who she'd been seemed so important that she'd finally given up on life in Atlanta and gone west, and then farther west, finally landing in LA to try and become a new her, Kate 2.0. I didn't know the details of how she'd come to LA, but I'd had them on my mind during the drive over from Malibu. Given Kate's history, by the time I pulled into the driveway on McAllister Street, I was ready for the worst. Instead, just looking at the neighborhood as I drove toward the house, I got the feeling she was reaching for peace and maybe finding it at last. I pulled in and there was Kate waving at me and arm in arm with her friend, a big bear of a woman with a huge smile on her face. I got out of the car to hugs all around and I could feel the tension and worry oozing away. Kate, it turned out, was married and her spouse, Sarah Chu, was so welcoming and kind that the whole vibe of peace and love washed away my worry. I was pinged once by Heather Newsom, a person involved otherwise, but she had nothing new to say. She knew I'd be talking to someone from JPL and asked me to keep her in the loop after that conversation took place. My Bob told me the first check for that retainer had already cleared my bank account, and I liked all the zeros. I told her I'd let her know what was said. So they're talking. He's getting to know Kate and Sarah, and he just really likes everything that's going on. And then his smarty dings, and he's getting a message, he's getting a call. So it is a woman named Abigail Parnell. And could we meet just the two of us for lunch at 1 p.m.? She'd arranged a pass for me at the main entrance to the Jet Propulsion Lab, and we could meet in the 303 cafeteria. The front guard would explain how to get there. Well, okay, sure. With any luck, I'd get a tour of JPL and some good interviews out of the deal, and I could sweep those. The campus was only 20 minutes away on the far side of Pasadena, and it was just noon, so I finished my beer and chatted with Kate and Sarah some more, got my quota of sister hugs in, and headed across town. Getting to the parking lot was easy. The walk across to the 303 building in the mild sunshine was every bit as pleasant as the walk I'd had the day before in St. Pete. Better, in fact, with the San Gabriel Mountains off to the north, improving the view as I walked along. I put on my sunglasses and clicked in so my Bob could have the sweep system record it all as I walked. Abigail Parnell, a good patriotic Irish surname, I noted, met me at the main front door to the building, and we walked into the first floor cafe where the food wasn't too bad, with the usual salad bar and grill. Abigail, who looked more Caribbean than Irish, with mocha skin and black hair, was very definitely in charge of the conversation. I'd done my background on her, of course, and I knew she was Canadian by birth, from a Barbadian mother who practiced law in Toronto, and a professorial Canadian-Irish father who taught engineering at Ryerson. She held a doctorate in physics and astronomy from Berkeley. She'd done her postdoc at JPL on assemblage package for quantum comm units for starships. She was everything Kate had hinted at and then some. Plus, she was down to earth and friendly despite all the credentials. We started with the usual hello and a handshake, and then some polite chit-chat about Kate and her talent with border collies. It's a little backstory. Then we went through the cafeteria line and loaded up our trays and sat down to talk. I was happy to hear Abigail praise Kate for the great job the vet's office had done. The collie's ear was going to heal just fine. We talked about Kate and Sarah for a few more minutes, and then after we'd each made good progress on our salads, Abigail reached into her bag and pulled out her Smartie. I enjoyed watching that news conference you and Chloe Carey had last night, she said. Then she laughed. It's amazing, really. Everyone wanted to know about your relationship first, and then, oh, by the way, what about those lights in the sky? I knew more than I could tell her, but I was sworn to secrecy with the agreements I'd made, so I just chuckled back and said, yes, it does make you wonder, eh? Were you really surprised to find out that they'd winked into visibility right before you saw them and then winked out a few minutes later? I was, I admitted. I kept recording for the minute or two they were passing overhead, and then when they moved farther away and disappeared, I just assumed they were no longer reflecting the sun or something like that. So what do you think? She asked, tilting her head a bit and smiling. She said she was dying to tell me. She had something she was dying to tell me. Satellites? The Chinese? Someone else? Aliens? Time travelers? Some expensive ad campaign? Not much of an ad campaign if no one can find them, I said, unless maybe it's meant to drum up interest by disappearing. Could be, but I don't think so, and I don't think you think so either, right? To be honest, I don't know what to make of it. I mean, aliens sounds crazy. Really? Aliens? She nodded and smiled. Well, yes. I mean, I'm in the business, so to speak, and even to me it seemed pretty far-fetched. She pulled out her Smartie, touched the screen, and then there's this. And she turned the Smartie around so I could see it, and there it was, a big thing, roughly in the shape of a rugby football, sort of an extra fat American football, big in the middle and tapered at each end. Abigail zoomed it in, and then we coasted along the surface skin of the thing, the ship, the robot, the alien man craft, the menace, or maybe a friend. Hell, who could know? She pulled back. It's about 200 meters long, give you some perspective. You can see the surface is perfectly smooth, no openings or hatches or antennae or anything that we can see. And get this, just to prove it can, we think, every now and then it disappears. It winks out. And suddenly all our sensing equipment says there's nothing there. Maybe it goes somewhere else when it does that? That's been said, she said. We have no idea how it's being done. That's way beyond any kind of technology that we have. And even when it's in view to us and a few others, most of the world can't sense this ship at all. The ship, or whatever it is, completely controls who can see it and when. There are just a few of us who even know it's there, and we've been able to send craft to check it out. Interesting, right? Right, I said. Seems to me like you've all been invited. She smiled. We hoped you might say that, actually. She toggled the screen. Along with us, the others who can see the ship are Aztec and Nordwick, Beijing Aerospace Command, Sri Haritoka, Alcantara in Brazil, and the Russians. And as she said that, I could see the other ships, all but one of them a good distance away from the alien craft. I was forgetting my real reason for being there. Can I record this, Abigail, for future use? She nodded, said yes. That's why you're here. But not here in the cafe, all right? Let's finish up lunch. You have that piece of pie, and then we'll head back to my office where I'll show you what we really have. I laughed, pushed the pie away, and so they leave. Her building was across Mariner Road and down 100 meters or so. We reached it in 5 minutes. As we were walking, she was speaking with her helpmate, getting things lined up for us. Orbital's my Sally, but no sharing, I heard her say, and full control while engaged, right? And then a moment later after that, good. What's she up to, my Bob? I said quietly to my own helpmate. She seems genuine, Peter. Let's see what happens. And so, like I usually do, I followed my Bob's advice as we walked into building 302 and went down 2 flights of stairs into a basement. There we walked along for a few doors, and then in we went. Inside was a large open space with a half-dozen people sitting at various terminals keeping an eye on whatever they were keeping an eye on. The only screen I could see as we walked by was up on a beige wall, and all it was showing was that same craft up there in orbit, motionless, still. Abigail was talking as she sat down at a desk and pulled out some sweep reception hardware. We've only seen this one ship, but we assume there are more. But maybe not all 10, you know. If they can stay hidden, makes us believe there are more of them than they really seem to be. She handed me the hardware. Put this on, she said. I think you're going to find this really amazing. I took the headgear from her and tried it on. Too small, so I started adjusting it while I asked, are they manned? No way to know. Have they shown any movement? Did the ship move or something on it move? No. But we're not as willing as some of the other agencies seem to be to put lives at risk, so we have just the drone you're about to enter. I tried the headset on again. Pretty good fit. I started fitting in the mouth and the nasal tips. Propulsion? Weapons? I asked. No way to know. I put on the glasses and the earphones and sat back in the chair. Ready? She asked. Sure, I said, and heard my Bob whisper in my ear that we were recording. The truth was I was worried. I'd never much liked being on the receiving end of a sweep. To me, getting lost in someone else's world, seeing it all through their eyes, hearing and smelling and touching the world through the senses of another person was a frightening thing. I'd done it only a few times and felt each time like I'd lost myself inside the mind and body of that other thing, that other person. The disorientation left me queasy, and I'd been happy when it was over. I didn't mind having thousands being part of my life, but I wanted nothing to do with being part of theirs. But I wasn't about to tell that to Abigail. Instead, I waited for the click of the connection, and then in an instant, I was in the drone. I was the drone. I swear I could taste cold metal and hear a slight susurrus of mechanical humming and see with impeccable clarity the alien ship, stubby, huge, silent. Above it a few hundred meters was what I guessed was Brazil's famous new Viajante, 2-man aircraft, very innovative, able to reach near-Earth orbit after hitchhiking on the new Airbus Jumbo. It was a beautiful thing, flat-bottom, winged, windowless, with dozens of high-res cameras built into the hull for viewing by the pilots. The Brazilians were very proud of themselves for having built it. I looked farther to the left, and there were 2 ships, one from India and the other Russian, given their markings. Both of them stubby, squat, simple technologies built to get to orbit atop a rocket and return via a heat shield and a parachute. You couldn't tell by looking, but I had to think the Russian ship, by far the bigger of the 2, was armed. I looked even farther left and found myself looking up close at something that looked ceramic. Too close. I'll pull back for you, said Abigail, who was watching it on her screen. My view pulled back and then back again, and then the ship from China finally resolved itself. that red flag with the gold stars on the side making it pretty obvious where it was from. It was close, very close to where the probe was that I was taking the sweep from, and too damn close to the alien ship. Dimly, in the dark distance, I heard Abigail talking. New design, she was saying. We don't even know what they're calling it. Has a sort of malevolent beauty, though, doesn't it? It did. The Chinese had built a flat-bottomed craft for re-entry, stubby wings with weaponry attached, what looked like an open mouth at the front. It reminded me of an old MiG jet fighter. Yes, I heard her say, so I must have spoken that last bit out loud. We monitored a Long March launch yesterday, and this was inside the final stage. We had visuals on it as it docked with their space station and either picked up or dropped off some taikonauts. After undocking, those wings unfolded and that front iris opened, and they came to visit. Probably some sort of pulse weapon from the front and more traditional rockets under those wings. Do you like the view, she asked me, and I nodded yes, the scene in front of me sliding along with my head motion. Amazing. You're receiving all this input from an X-56 AI, launched from a new Boeing Aurora, then scramjet to hypersonic and over to rocket power once in orbit. It's about a half-meter long. Looks like something you'd fly radio-controlled from your backyard, except it's thought-controlled. You don't need me to zoom or wide-angle or pan. Just think it. You should give that a try. I practiced a bit with this amazing new toy. Hard to believe I was in Pasadena, California, and this drone was somewhere up above as I watched mankind's future unfold before my very eyes. I wanted to pan right, and so it happened, giving me a great look at the alien whale of a ship that sat there. I wanted left, and there in the distance were the ships from India and Russia, and then mouth open, malevolent, the Chinese ship. I wanted to see more of that Chinese ship up close, and in a few seconds I could. No windows, all embedded microcams to tell the crew what was happening. The visual technology was probably as good as mine, I thought, and probably made in the same German or Swiss optics factory. I was feeling more in control now, less overwhelmed, more like perhaps this was me, Peter Holman, connected closely to this tiny drone, rather than being totally lost in it. I hoped I could keep control, could hang on to the knowledge of who I was down on that planet below, connected somehow to this thing, this other me. I looked, and in that open maw at the front of the Chinese ship was a kind of screen. I zoomed in, hoping like hell that this was a lens zoom and I wasn't actually moving closer. Surely they would detect me. Surely they already had. It was a mesh in that open maw, finely woven, some sort of protective device. I zoomed closer, then closer again, and then it was this, as if I were falling into that open maw and getting closer, until I could see the openings in the mesh and look through them. A tube, 3 meters long, 1 meter in circumference, humming, no lights, vibrating, increasing in pitch, ready to do whatever it was that it would do. A niggling voice in my left ear, that damn human, Abigail. Peter, I'm still watching on my Smarty. That's a nanotube mesh, carbon-oriented nanotubes. That's technology we didn't think the Chinese had. It's very advanced. It's very advanced. I wandered back from my new reality to the old one. What's it do, I asked her. We don't know. Some sort of magnetic field emissions, taking the energy from that tube behind it and enhancing it. Might be some sort of sensory probe, sort of a long-distance magnetic resonance. We have people checking on that now. I drifted back into my second state, but held on to my own reality enough to murmur to her, whatever it is, I think they're about to let it loose. If they do, she was saying, when there was a vibration, silent in the vacuum but visible as a kind of trembling of the mesh, and then the mesh itself detached and shot out of the mouth of that ship toward the alien craft. Somewhere in the background I could hear Abigail talking to me, but I was too busy hanging on to the ride to pay her any attention. In an instant, I'd gone back to seeing the whole process from a distance and then zooming in again to watch the square meter of mesh travel quickly across the void to reach the alien ship to which it attached itself and clung there. And then, as I found myself looking closely at the site of the attached mesh, I saw a sort of glowing in the hull of the alien ship, a round, warm, cheery orange glow that was 3 or 4 times the size of the mesh. And then, with no warning, there was a bright flaring, and I saw as that flaring light reached out to touch the Chinese ship, and the ship began to disintegrate, melting and falling apart as the light moved up and to the right, and then quickly, effortlessly, lingered for a second on the other ships from Earth without destroying them. And finally, while I watched in horror and amazement, found its way to me, or to the me that was connected to the microdrone. That light touched me, and there was an amazing blazing whiteness, and then a scream, That terrible scream I'd heard the day before, back here again, bringing pain, a searing pain that started at my eyes and grew to encompass me totally, and then, blessedly, there was nothing. Darkness. But I existed. I knew I was me. Do you know why you are here? A human voice was asking me. I knew that voice. I struggled with remembering who it was. Female. No, it wouldn't come to me, but still. No, I said. It's because I asked for you, the voice said. Okay. Very mysterious. Okay. So I have a story to tell you about reading this very selection. Yesterday in St. Petersburg, Florida, at the Festival of Reading. Bear in mind, it was the Festival of Reading. I gave a reading, and I was reading that selection, and there was a crowd of about this size, and it was an elderly couple sitting right there. And about 5 lines from the end, right when all that mesh is happening and the alien ship is shooting, a guy stood up and he said, "Stop reading." Really? And we all went, "What?" And he said, "I want to read it myself. I don't want you to read it." And we said, and he said, and I said, "All right, well, another couple of course, now I'm going to read the last 2 lines after they're completely destroyed." And he said, and he turned around and he looked at the rest of the audience and he said, "Am I right?" And they all said, "No." It's a reading. We came here to hear, And he said, "Well, I'm leaving then." And he grabbed his wife. She looked much beset upon, and they walked right out the door. It's never, ever happened to me before. Stop. So thank you for not trying to stop me. I wouldn't have stopped anyway. I would have powered right through it. All right.
Well, Rena's opening the bar. Let's take like 4.75 minutes, and I'll get a drink, and then come back and talk to these guys.
All right.
Okay. Cool.
To find out how you can attend SFNSF or to see the upcoming schedule of readings, go to sfnsf.org. Or you can follow the event on Twitter at SFNSF Events and on Meetup under SFNSF Events.
I'm getting ready here.
All right, well, I'm going to open this. I mean, I'm sure people have comments or questions, but I wanted to challenge Rick on one thing. He said that he certainly has the largest footprint in the baseball story subgenre of science fiction, but it's actually not that, I can think of Michael Bishop, I can think of John Kessel, I can think of Karen Fowler, who wrote a whole story about women's baseball. Anybody else think of anybody else?
Shaban, yeah. Yeah, there's a ton of them. There's a ton of them. In fact, a lot of them are in a book you can buy back there. Field of Fantasies.
Oh.
I got reprints from a bunch of those, Mainstream and T.C. Boyle did one. Many people have written baseball.
Okay, so you did an anthology of it. Or you edited?
Edited an anthology. Jacob handed it off to me. Bless his heart.
All right.
Bless his heart.
Well,
It's a pain to do, but it was great to do, too.
That's great. All right, I'm opening up. Anybody got a question for either one of these guys, or a comment, or a complaint? Jacob.
So, Rick, you mentioned that you were really pleased to be here because your experiences in journalism led you back to letterpress. Just how old are you? And could you talk about that experience with letterpress?
Well, I'll tell you, Jacob, about 3 weeks ago, I was at my 50th high school reunion. So you can do the math, my friend.
So you graduated when you were 12?
Yes, apparently. Yeah. And it was wonderful being at that reunion. It was a Jesuit high school, very sort of academically and athletically ambitious school. And I was the quarterback of an okay football team, but the guys remember it. The memories have gotten so much more generous to my skills. So the guys are remembering all these wonderful things I never even did. So it was great fun to go back to
Where was this high school?
St. Louis.
In
St. Louis University High School, university's prep school.
Cool.
Hello. So both of you guys are in the stories that you're, even the segments of the books that you read, are in dialogue with the past, as one often is. But in specific, like Nick, you're in dialogue with Lovecraft, and with, I would say, Lovecraft fandom, in a big bad way, and also with the novel Bimbos and the Death Sun and other things like that, and you're in dialogue with every first contact story ever written in the history of science fiction. So when you set out to write something like that, where there's gonna be comparisons, especially like if you're quoting Lovecraft or whatever, or you're doing a first contact with aliens and spaceships and all that, how do you approach it and say, well, this is going to be an interesting way of doing it in the 21st century?
You want to go first?
No, you go. You take it.
Well, there have been many, many, many first contact stories. In fact, in a recent interview I did, my aliens are they're from an aquatic world. They're mammalian, pretty much. They look a little bit like porpoises. They walk upright. So, gee, who has done porpoises that are aliens and first contact, and thanks for all the fish. So it's, I mean, those of us who are in this world are aware of all that stuff. I just tried to find some fresh things to do. I was mostly interested in the economics. Why would aliens want to come here? And so I went to the mercantilism of the Hudson Bay Company and the East India Trading Company, where you create a colony that can make you profit. And that's why they came. So from that perspective, I was just trying to find in a really, that's a vein that's been mined heavily. So I'm just trying to find a little bit of fresh ore in there somewhere.
I really don't think about it. Honestly, even what I was saying before about changing mysteries by having the victim speak, I just thought that up the moment it came out of my mouth. It wasn't something I thought about a year ago when I wrote this story. I think I might have seen somebody on an Amazon review say that. It's like, oh, that might be interesting, and keep it in my mind. But I don't think about it at all. I only think about what comes out of my head. Like with the voice that comes out of my head when I'm writing something, like the tone, the structure, that kind of thing. And I don't spend a lot of time thinking, oh, well, I got to add my bit to this subgenre. But it's interesting that we're here in this, bookbinder museum, which is, sort of created genres. That we can make a lot of books. We don't just make a lot of the same book. We make a lot of different books. So we're able to, mass culture, mass production of things, and people who read genre fiction want the same experience over and over again. So in a way, it's kind of a weird question because readers don't care. Oh, a cat mystery, finally another one. It's been 2.5 weeks. When people pick up Rick's book, they're going to say, oh, First Contact again. They're like, oh, yeah, First Contact. I'm ready to read this book because I've been primed by the last 45 First Contact books I read.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Well, there's kind of both ways. I mean, people do look. First Contact has a familiarity, but you're always looking for the new thing. It seems to me like in the beginning they were mostly based on colonialism, and so they had the perils of colonialism and the dangers, and everybody was pretty sort of human. And then I think right now that we've got, to me, one of the great First Contact stories was Ted Chiang's story, which won the Debut back 10 years ago, I think, and or was it 16? It's quite a while. Anyway, where he, that was a tendency that arose later. Is you try to, how do you make aliens really alien? How in the world do you do this? So that was clearly what Ted was struggling with, and how do you reveal how I haven't seen the movie yet, but I remember the story. So there are, interesting. There are interesting problems in a first contact story and possibilities. How do
Well,
you?
this seems to be part of the new version of it, where it's a media spectacle. Like everything's so heavily media and normalized. Oh, what 9/11 happened? Where were you when 9/11 happened? Well, I was watching TV somewhere for the most part. And this is kind of that. So other than colonialism, it's about how a narrative can spread through society via mediated means. What do you think?
I mean, I'm very interested in the media and the future of the media, having been deeply involved in both the academic and the practice of the mass media since I graduated from high school.
49 years.
50 years ago. So, and that's part of what this is all about. There you go. Yeah. So, I think it's this. I've talked about these aliens in many stories in Asimov's and elsewhere over the years, and as I've done that, I've sort of narrowed my focus on the alien that interests me the most, and the economics of why would aliens come here, right? And so, which gets back to mercantilism. And then, of course, I'm always, as Jacob knows, I am always deeply concerned with relationships. So the relationship between my protagonist and the shape-changing machine alien. So.
Well, I was interested in Jacob's insight because I'm wondering what is fiction ever about but relationships?
Yeah, Jacob.
I mean, even when there's no people around, Robinson Crusoe, it's the relationship with loneliness. I mean, it's anyway. You could say that about it. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions.
Yeah.
So I have the mic.
You've got the mic.
So I would ask both of you, in your futures, do people read books?
Well, they don't read books now. I mean, if you read more than 2 books a year, you're a cultural outsider in the U.S. Generally speaking, people read 1 book, 2 books a year, 1 nonfiction, 1 fiction. I talk about this every time I'm here. It comes up every time, Terry. They read the popular novel, and they read whatever the big nonfiction is that year, which is usually either about Jesus Christ or carbohydrates. Right? Jesus good, carbohydrates bad. That's if you're looking to become a millionaire in publishing. Just keep those 2 things in mind.
I think yes, but I think it becomes a narrower and narrower top of the pyramid. I think if there's a pyramid shape, that there was a point in time when maybe halfway up the pyramid was people who were reading, and I think it's over time it's getting to be narrower and narrower, which is, I mean, it's already. I think I saw an article in PW a few years ago that said that in America, Publishers Weekly estimated there were about 100,000 literary readers out of 300 million.
By the way, none of you count in that figure. They're not even counting genre fiction there. There's some other group, not even worth counting.
But in other words, I think, I mean, the economics of it work at our little tiny scale. So, right.
But they work because the pyramid gets smaller, but the population.
Yeah, the population grows, right?
So, in the back, who said?
Does your statistic include audiobooks?
I don't think it did. And I have to admit, I have not paid a lot of attention to audiobooks. I have a hard time with audiobooks because as I'm listening, my mind wanders. I hear a little something, and then I realize a chapter's gone by and I missed it entirely. So I have a hard time getting lost in them. But that's a big market. But I think there's gaming is huge, and that's storytelling. But it's not what we think of as novels and the written word and storytelling. Will there always be storytelling? I think yes. Will it always be ink on paper? I think. Although didn't we just have a great year with independent bookstores? Isn't that a really good year, I think. And didn't hardcovers do better this year after having plateaued? Jacob, you might know those stats. I thought I read that. I thought I read that ebooks plateaued. So, who knows? Who knows? I mean, we know from last Tuesday that totally impossible things happen. Some of them good and some of them disastrous, but they do happen. So.
Can you imagine the Donald Trump Presidential Library?
No, I can't actually. That'll be interesting. In Trump Tower. Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bring that into it. I apologize. When I say stuff like that, you have to stand up and say, stop!
Well, what do you think, Jacob? You've actually had a fairly successful arc in a time when the big publishers are diminishing, and
Well, I think Rick's hypothesis is pretty accurate. 100,000 seems a little low, but that doesn't mean that it's off by all that much. And Nick says, maybe science fiction wasn't counted. What literary, I would interpret would mean readers of novels and not necessarily readers of biographies and other things, lots of which are books and are artfully constructed. So, I would expect that number to be much higher, but as a concept of it actually being a very slim portion of the country at large, that's probably not that far off, but maybe it's more like, I don't know, 500,000 or something. That would be my guess, and I don't really know for sure.
When Tor comes out with a hardcover book, what number, Jacob, of sales makes Tor happy on the average hardcover book?
My guess, and I know our economics and I don't know Tor's.
All right.
And I know they're actually happy with some numbers that are lower than ours because they have certain print privileges that we don't share. But I would guess that their target would probably be very similar to us in that I think they start getting happy when you cross about 5,000 copies.
Think about that. Think about that. Think about that, Greg. You're in a. Yeah. Thank God you're with us, my friend. It's good that you go slumming with us. That's great, and you write for the magazines for 9 cents a word. That's fabulous. But that's incredible.
in what way?
Well, it's that.
Well, but then you have.
It's such a small number, such a fraction of a percentage.
That's a science fiction hardcover market. Science fiction has traditionally been a mass market paperback, cheapest form possible, which is why science fiction made such a good easy transition into ebooks.
Right.
There's still bestsellers in young adult books.
Right.
And some of those books sell hundreds of thousands of copies, and a few of them sell millions.
Right.
And so, I think what we have to remember is that, yes, there's all these readers, but what readers really want, and it's the same thing we see in other mass media stuff, and I'm sure you follow this in the classes you've taught, is that there's a dialogue. And so people aren't interested necessarily in the book that 5,000 people have read. They're interested in that book that 1 million people have read, because they all have to read it because they're all going to talk about that book. When you read a book that's only been read by 5,000 other people, you might be in the circle that's going to talk about that book, but the world at large has no idea what's going on, and there's not a path for communication about that. Right. So, I think movies and all these other things are mass communication, and maybe books are communications.
Less mass.
That's the way I see it. I worked in publishing, 25 years ago in New York. And I remember one day we had some fairly big book. I think it was Mommy Dearest or something like that. And the publisher said, and this is Berkeley Books. It was a mass market publisher. And the publisher came in, we were having an editorial meeting, and she said, let's just remember, if we sell 1 million copies, we're a mass market company. If we sell 1 million copies, we're doing fantastic. But the real mass market is movies. And 1 million people, if 1 million people go to a movie, it's a flop. It lost money. And so let's just do a reality check on how mass market publishing.
And the most successful book might be the one that's sold to the movies.
Yeah.
You know, in the 90s when I was started working in publishing, one of the most successful things ever was the folder for which you could put the 50 cent quarters in. That was one of the big 5 publishers' biggest seller ever was that map of the states where you stick your quarters in. And that floated so many books. Because it was like book-like object. Because it was printed, it was sealed, you shipped it quickly, you could send it back at the end, and it sold tons in bookstores.
So that's what we're dealing with.
That's right.
But another thing I noticed about publishing, I mean, Tor is now probably the biggest science fiction publisher. I was working in publishing right when mass market was going out. It was on its way out. But the big names in science fiction, Heinlein and Asimov and Clarke and all this, one reason they became big names is because there weren't all that many writers, and also all their books were published with 50, 60, 70,000 copies. So it went to every little drugstore in America. There was a rocket ship on the cover, and it said Ray Bradbury, or it said Asimov, or it said Poul Anderson, or it said, and by the time I started as a writer, that was no longer true. If I published books and they would sell 4,000 or 5,000, and people read you, and it's nice and everything, but you're not a name, and nobody who doesn't already know your books is going to go out and buy your books. That to me is what created the golden age of science fiction, and the names, and there was never a second generation. Nobody thinks Malzberg or Tom Dish or it's like rock. If you had rock and roll without, you had Chuck Berry, you had you had Elvis, but you never had the Beatles. You never had the second generation.
Is it or maybe airports the last bastion of drugstores where you'd walk in and everybody had racks of selling books?
It's all big Lee Smith mysteries. There's 4.
Yeah, but
there's huge mysteries.
That's like the last place where you can actually expect people to walk in and look at the racks and buy a book because they're got a 4-hour flight coming up.
Yeah. But it's usually a thriller or a mystery.
Yeah.
I don't see science fiction near much.
I don't see science fiction there.
I do.
You do?
Do you?
Like what? The what?
The big international airports here in the States, I see a lot of science fiction.
All right, good, great.
You see Robert George, you see fantasy.
Yeah.
All the birds this size, the airport. Yeah.
But you also see science fiction published as mainstream lit YA, like Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you see the bestsellers.
Sorry.
All right.
Anyone else?
I think Ronnie should tell us about what you just said about Israel and publishing.
Oh, okay.
He publishes in Israel.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ronnie. I'm a publisher.
Yeah, what do you publish? You're
I'm a publisher and editor in Israel. I have my own company, Graph Publishing. I buy rights for translations. And what I was saying to Francesca earlier was when Jacob was talking about numbers, that 5,000 copies would make Tor or Jacob happy. Well, we are only 7 million people, not 300 million, and 5,000 copies would make me happy. I mean, in absolute, and I've heard this before, it's not the first time, in absolute numbers, we're pretty much identical to the US, which is amazing, because even if we have more readers, the gap is still huge.
Now, who are your big authors?
Robert Charles Wilson and Mark Twain, and Rick Riordan, Cassandra Clare, Holly Black, Chris Robertson, Daryl Gregory.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So I have no answer for you because he was never published in Israel yet. I'm going to publish one of his books in the following year, and there's another publisher who bought the rights for one of his other books, so they're going to publish it too. But so far, only short stories by him were published in Israel.
You know, it would be really, really interesting to see a breakdown of what countries culturally are the most interested in books. I mean, the Irish are really still interested in books.
Well, I can tell you that our readership is in deep decline, I'm afraid to say. And yet, apparently, we still, percentage-wise, have more readers than here.
Yeah.
Percentage-wise. And I can only
Recent
guess.
events just prove that to me, absolutely.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to say, but we're ahead of you 8 years, so.
All right. Yeah.
I've been there, done that.
Oh, yeah.
I read an article on Iceland recently, and apparently everybody writes a book that's traditional, and they give books at Christmas, which for some reason are shrink wrapped. And they get this huge catalog in the fall of books, and then they give each other books for Christmas. They talk about what books they're going to do.
And then, but I know that in Iceland and Holland and other places, everybody reads English. Yeah. So do many Israelis read English, or it's all in Hebrew?
English is very spread out in Israel. Many Israelis read English, but more Israelis read Hebrew.
Okay.
Israelis would always, most of them prefer to read in Hebrew first.
Okay. And do you publish in English or?
No. I just publish. I cannot. I'm legally forbidden from publishing in English. I can only publish in Hebrew because I buy translation rights.
Right.
If you want to buy the English version of a book that I publish, you'll have to buy it from Amazon or special
All right.
stores.
What about Japan? I mean, you work with Japan in your day job.
So what about
what
Japan?
What do the numbers look like there?
Yeah, they read?
Oh yeah, they read, but there's also enormous manga.
Yeah.
And the reason is that the written language is so complex that you really need to have graduated high school to even read a newspaper. So manga is extremely popular. It's not just like superheroes. There's a manga about everything. There's a manga about rice. There's manga about golf. And it is not unusual to see subway trains full of people reading manga. And books are also very popular. I mean, there's a huge readership there, but it's less than manga and more than in the U.S. But they also have a different distribution system. I mean, the mass market distribution system didn't vanish because people stopped writing or reading. It vanished because of economic decisions among distributors, where they started off with 500 distributors in the early 90s. By the mid-90s, they had 7. And that means a lot. That means all the institutional knowledge of, at this gas station we sell Westerns vanished. And then Westerns vanished. So actually economic decisions outside of just, what we think people are doing instead of reading had a major part of things. People stopped reading when books stopped being available to them. My friend Brian Keene was a mass market horror novelist. He was with Leisure Books. Leisure Books vanished. And then he went to small presses and print-on-demand presses and ebooks. And just this past summer, he had a new book out from Thomas Dunn, which is an imprint of Macmillan, sort of a sister imprint of Tor. And when he went on tour with this book, Pressure, he heard from people who are over 30 saying, "Wow, it's so great you've got a book again." Even though he's had about 10 books since the end of Leisure Books. But people under 30 are like, "Yeah, I follow you on ebook. I got Amazon. I got this stuff coming to my house." Yeah. But there are still a large number of people who walk into a store, and if the store's not there, they stop reading. Right. And Japanese fiction can get produced very quickly. They often produce large novels in multi-volume sets of small mass market, analogs to mass market paperbacks. So you read the first third of a novel, and then next month the second third is out, and the third month the third thing's out, which in America is very difficult to do. We're practicing binge reading now by getting 3 volumes of, say, Jeff Vandermeer's book out in 1 year.
Back to the Dickensian method, right? Yeah. Everybody
And you're publishing romances online, historical? romantic?
Me?
Yes, you.
I am publishing my backlist from slightly before the Pleistocene age. I have 5 books that I wrote when I was young and foolish, and they are sending home moderate amounts of money. Not huge amounts, but they're 30-year-old books, so I'm getting some money from them. I will add as a data point, my daughter, who is 20, asked for an e-reader. We gave it to her. Within 6 weeks, she was like, I can't do this. I need paper. And there have been studies done that say that you retain more. I read with my e-reader things I've already read. Comfort reading, hello, things like that. But I do not read new things that I want to actually make sense of on a screen.
Yeah.
Matt, talk about Cereal Box because I've been.
Cereal Box is a sort of Dickensian fictional thing where their model is TV. A season would be 12 to 15,000 word episodes in a longer piece. And so I am one of the authors of a story about Charles II and his various wives, mistresses, one-night stands, what have you, and court intrigue and things like that. It's called Whitehall, and it came out last year. But there are all sorts of different things. Ellen Kushner's Swords Point universe is, there's a series called Tremontaine. Max Gladstone has a series, and it's team writing, which is a very interesting way to write. I had never written anything that way before, and I'm not sure I would make it in TV, but it's an interesting way to shape an overall story.
How do you communicate? The team.
The team, well, first we had a one weekend sort of hammer out the overall story kind of thing. We have a team leader, and then we go back and forth on Slack, which is the medium that we chose. And there's a lot of sort of frantic calling up and, oh my God, you took that scene. I wanted to do that scene.
Yeah, I could.
When you're working with actual history where there are
that was my
actual
next
scenes,
question. Yeah. How do you get along? Yeah.
No, mostly we got along very well. We all seem to admire each other's strengths, which is a lovely thing.
All right, well, let me ask a question about both of you guys teach. You teach fiction writing.
Mm-hmm.
You teach media and something else. What was it?
Some journalistic writing, but
Any fiction writing?
very rarely, but occasionally.
Mm-hmm. And when you teach fiction writing, Nick, what do you have to unteach? What do you have to do with these people? Are they kids or?
They vary widely. Mostly they're bored techies, I suppose you'd say, and occasionally kids. And the most important thing to unteach them is television. Like, they don't even know how scenes end. They will literally put in a scene break where a commercial might be. I remember one guy, even literally had a gun. The character had a gun, pointed at somebody's head and said, "I'm gonna shoot you fucking right now, you bitch." Scene break, blam! So there's no scene break there at all. There's no time and space.
Yeah.
Right, there's no reason for that little dinkus to be on the page, but there it was. And the other thing you have to unteach them is the ego. The ego is always the enemy, whether you are the narcissist who wants nothing but praise or the covert narcissist who wants to be punished and get pleasure from being punished. And you have to really sort of navigate that very thoroughly. Because both people come and say, tear my stuff apart, and then you do, and then they get upset. But some of them get really happy, and they don't improve because their happiness comes from them being treated poorly.
Okay.
So those are the two psychoanalytic things you got to sort of circle around too. But mostly what you do is just wait for the good writer to show up, and then you give them a lot of attention. So everybody else sort of pays for that good writer to get an education. Yeah.
All right, that makes sense. Now, what's teaching media, right?
I teach one course I taught for many years. Was called Mass Communications and Society, an intro to mass media course. So you taught the whole history of the media, ending up with where it is today, and then make a guess about where it's going, medium by medium, where it's going in the future. And generally, that's a lot of fun for the students because you show movie clips, you show Lucille Ball doing her Vitamita Vegemin sketch, you do, and all of that stuff is fun, but it's only fun if you're actually paying attention in class. So it's very ironic that in that class I had to ban all media use. You cannot use your phones. The kids would take pictures of the outline I had up on the screen as if that was as good as taking notes. Take a picture on their phone, which of course means nothing. They haven't put that in. So I found several studies from Princeton and elsewhere that showed that your retention is far, far better when you take handwritten notes on paper because it forces you to synthesize and think about what you're hearing as you're hearing it and write down the important things that will come back to you then when you look at those notes. And you get better and better as the semester progresses. And the students, early in the semester, it would be open rebellion because they couldn't believe it. You have to shut your laptops. You cannot have your phones out. They'd put them at their feet. So I had to be. It was like being a fifth grade nun. I had to walk around. But they did so much better. So what I did ultimately was I started doing quizzes, iClicker quizzes, electronic quizzes at the end of every class. Very, very easy quizzes from that class's notes, and you could keep your notes. Handwritten notes only, you could keep them in front of you as you took the quiz. What a great teaching tool that was. Because they learned to sort of synthesize to be ready for that simple quiz at the end, which means they now knew it. Their scores went up for midterms and finals, all because they were taking handwritten notes and their brain was engaged. Instead of all just receiving, they were actually thinking about it.
So they know how to write.
They had to learn how to write if they didn't know, yeah.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we've got to sell all these machines and go home. Okay, well, yes, please.
Question for Nick. I'm just curious, and I've got a little slice of this from Facebook, I guess, but how was I Am Providence received in the Lovecraft fan community, and how it's been received in the mystery world, which I really don't know a whole lot about?
Well, I guess the distinction inside Lovecraft fandom is the more prominent you are in fandom, the more ostentationally you have not read it. So if you're a real big name fan or a big name editor in Lovecraft stuff, you've ever heard of me or this book? It's not come up in conversation. This is not on any level whatsoever something that's past your radar, really. As you get lower down, there's a big gender split among readers where men will say, this book is funny, but it's kind of unfair. It's really picking on people. Women are like, yes, it's true. Every word is true.
Yes, it's true. Yeah. Might as well just fess up. Yes,
right.
It's true.
Yeah. And it's done super well. It went into a second printing 3 weeks in.
That's great.
As opposed to my usual never. So that's been great. And in the mystery community, it's been challenging. I remember I'm actually the president of the Mystery Writers of America's Northern California chapter.
You are?
Yeah.
I had no idea.
For one more beautiful month until I turn over the reins.
I'm a MWA member.
Oh, good. You owe me $5 or something.
No. I'm in Florida.
Coming into my territory. And I just remember at some event we had recently, a member had my book and in her hand. I was looking at it and said, "Oh my God, are you edgy? Is this an edgy book?" I'm like, "Yeah, kind of." And it went right back on the shelf. I didn't even see her hand move; just like sort of vanished from her hand. But some people have read it and have said, "Oh, this is a good mystery." Other people have said, "You forgot the denouement," and I've not forgot the denouement. I specifically left one out, to make it more of a noir ending, more of a Lovecraftian ending, which is by turns thrill then confuse people, which is the inevitable result of having a mystery that you get in the science fiction section that says horror on the back. So it's all my own fault. Yeah, as usual.
Obviously. All right, these guys are signing books. Books are for sale. And both are authors here, and they both know how to write cursive.
Yes, no promises, actually.
So, and otherwise, I'll see you guys next year. We're going to kick it off with, as we always do, with Kim Stanley Robinson, who's at McMurdo right now. We just got an email from him the other day. And Cecilia Holland, the distinguished historical novelist. So that'll be in January, and I'll see you guys then.
All right.
The SF and SF podcast was produced by Marin McDonnell, recorded and engineered by Rusty Hodge. Thanks for listening. So